Great. So I'm going to get started. I see people are still kind of coming, and that's all good. So we'll keep catching people up. Good afternoon, good evening, folks. It's just tipping into late afternoon, early evening where I am. My name is Lily Benowitz. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm joining you from Dakota Land in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm part of the On Being Project. And for accessibility purposes, I'm going to describe physically what I look like for those who are either not looking at this who cannot see me. So I have light white skin, brown hair just past my shoulder blades. I'm wearing a white and gray striped shirt with a green cardigan over it. And I have a mostly tan background. I'm sitting in my home office on Dakota Land in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And for those who may not know, the On Being Project, where I work, is a media and public life initiative that tends to the human change that makes social transformation possible through both our flagship show, On Being with Krista Tippett, and through our other audio content, such as Poetry Unbound, which we currently have a season of that coming out right now, as well as creating tools for the art of living and gatherings, convenings, and holding space like I am doing today. I specifically work with religious and spiritual leaders to help them deepen their work in social healing. And kind of three of the animating questions that really informs our project are: what does it mean to be human? How do we want to live? And who will we be to each other? So we create experiences and content that really help people reflect on those questions, locate that for themselves so that they can show up more fully in a grounded way with others. And so I'm hoping to do a version of that with all of you today. I know we're rounding out the end of Rural Women Everywhere Conference. And so I'm hoping that this can be a moment of respite, reflection, and really being able to tune into the questions of what is mine to do? Where is my heart being pulled? How can I align my actions with where I'm being called? And how can I do that in a sustainable way? The issues that we face are so big and can feel so tiring, and especially after living through all that's happened in the past 2 years, that we're all very tired. I'm very tired. I know that people are. And so thinking about what does it look like to do this work meaningfully, purposefully, and sustainably in a way that also energizes us. So those are big questions, and we can't possibly solve them in an hour, but I think the hope is to get a little bit closer to something that might feel true for each of you through some reflection together. So I've said it before, but we're recording. Would encourage folks to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable. If you do so, you will be in the recording. It's helpful for me to kind of see and be able to gauge where people are at throughout the session if I can see you. And this is really like, take what's useful for you, leave what's not. So if turning away from the screen, if not looking at this while you're just listening, lay down, that's great. There will be opportunities for reflection. So if you do that best through writing or through drawing or some other way of metabolizing that, I'd encourage you to get materials that you might need to do that together. So we're going to start with kind of locating where each of us are, and that can be you can take that at any scale. So I'm going to do kind of this practice throughout our time together of posing a question. Maybe I'll use some content to prompt that. Maybe I'll just talk for a little bit and then put on some music and put up a question. And you'll have about 5 minutes to do reflection in the ways that you want on those questions. We'll come back together, potentially have some ways of sharing back, and then continue on. So that's kind of some of the ebb and flow of how our time will feel. So I think the first thing is really thinking about this question, what are you bringing into this moment? And what informs how you're showing up? So that could be your lineage, ancestry, practices of grounding that have been really restorative to you in the past multiple years. That could be a religious or spiritual tradition or practice. And it also could be experiences that you've had since the beginning of 2020. Whether that's personally, professionally, relationally, that have really impacted or colored, flavored how you're feeling, the texture of yourself right now. And I think I would want to encourage you to both think about what that is and then think about what the significance of that might be. Is that changing how you're thinking about something, how you're viewing time, how you're able to connect with others? Are you feeling tension around things? Are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling gratitude for something? So kind of in that swirl of questions, it's a lot of questions and it's a meaty one. But I think whatever is helpful as your endpoint to start locating where you are, that's what feels important right now. So I'm going to put on some music. I'm going to display a question and we'll come back in about 5 minutes together. But feel free to take this as quiet reflection time. back. 5 minutes can feel like a long time in a Zoom setting. And so I really appreciate all of you kind of going with and holding that spaciousness together. I think especially in a moment of virtual to virtual to virtual, sometimes it's hard to take a moment to just be and breathe together. And so I appreciate you leaning into that vulnerability of doing that together, individual experiences alongside others. So we're going to have an opportunity to kind of greet each other. And I'm going to have Marty at Rural Assembly break us up into some breakout groups to talk about what is one practice, experience, or relationship that has sustained you over the past 20 months. If you don't want to go into a breakout room, that's all good. We can have a quiet space in this main room or a group conversation in this main room. But I'll have Marty, I think I'll do 10 minutes for groups of 3 or 4 to get to have a little bit of time to discuss. And so I will put in the chat what the prompt is, so you'll have it with you as you go. Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sure that someone got cut off at a really great quote when you got whisked away back into the main room. And I'm happy that you made it here with all your pieces intact. So hopefully that was a good moment to kind of connect with the other people in this space, reflect on what the past 20 months have held. And we're going to turn now to a conversation between our former executive producer of On Being Studios, Lily Percy, and her conversation partner, Alex L., who is a beloved Instagram presence and host of the podcast, Hey Girl. And they have a conversation about self-care as generational care. And so it's a really wonderful framing of what does it look like to sustain ourselves in ways that sustain our communities. And so as you listen to this, it's about a 6-minute clip. I will ask that you notice words and phrases that stand out to you. If there are moments that get you remembering a story or an experience. And is there anything that sparks your imagination? Just like really listening with openness and seeing how the story and words live within you. From there, we're going to reflect a little bit about how do you recharge? So if that's helpful to know kind of where we're heading, here's some wisdom of some beloved conversation partners to kind of prompt us in that reflection.
To embrace it. You know, self-care is kind of like this buzzword now that's just thrown about. So I'm curious, as you think about that time when you first started to embrace it, like what did it mean to you?
What it meant to me is showing up for myself so that I could show up for other people. And to put that in context, I became a mother at 18. So at 23, I was a young single mother. And when my daughter was born, I vowed to myself that things would be different. I would be a different type of mother. I would be a different type of woman. And I would do my best to stop chasing love in places that were rejecting me. And that required a lot of self-soothing because rejection is a part of the human experience.
Yeah.
And when I was in that early stage of figuring out what self-care meant for me, not only as a mother, but as a woman, as a young woman trying to find her way and trying to dismantle generational cycles, I was really called to check myself and become more self-aware. And that's really what self-care looked like for me, is getting to know who I was and what that meant for my then one child. I have 3 children now, and also myself and my potential partner, which I'm married now. So everything really comes full circle, right? And it requires us to show up and get up close and personal with the things that really are uncomfortable. And that's what I learned, is self-awareness has to play a role in the self-care practice. Self-care as community care for me is the filling up of self so that we can pour into others and not be depleted, right? So as I mentioned earlier, I watched my grandmother do this. I watched my mother do this, and so on and so forth. So deciding that, wow, that's, for me, that is not how I want to move through the world. I don't want to pour into anyone with my last drop and then have nothing left for myself, because then when it comes time to give again, I'll have nothing. So essentially, it's this refueling. It's this reconnecting and realigning with the self so that we can show up intentionally, right? That's the key word for me, is intentionally and on purpose. And as a Black woman in this world and in this work, I think often folks who identify as women, we are always kind of like taught at a young age to be the strong one and caretake, right? Be it, you know, from a mothering standpoint or even from taking care of siblings or taking care of our parents, right? And we're supposed to do that with a smile on our face, with nothing in our cup, and gladly. And I am dismantling that as a Black woman for my lineage, because I want my 3 daughters to look at me and see the permission that they don't have to do that. They don't have to be tired. They don't have to be broken down and worn down. Choosing to do this hard work for me, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but it doesn't just heal me, it heals my lineage. And I speak about that a lot. How this is intentional soul work, how everything I put into the world as an author and as a facilitator and as a human and a woman and a Black woman, I wanted to give other people permission to heal themselves so that they can heal their lineage. And not only so they can heal their lineage, in addition to healing their lineage, because that's what it does. That's what our intentional healing does, you know? And I was speaking with someone about motherhood recently, and I was saying, it is so hard to be the matriarch of healing in your family.
Whew.
It is so hard. And every time I try, I don't really try anymore, because what's the point? But because it's meant for me to do this work, so there's no way I can like avoid it.
Exactly. There's no trying. There's just doing
Right,
now for you.
Right, exactly. I was gonna say, like, whenever I would try to avoid this work, it would be like, girl, where are you going? Like, no, come here. And that's how I knew that this work that I'm doing is so much greater than me.
So Alex Elle talks about repeatedly emphasizing choosing self-care. So we're going to take the next few minutes to consider what it might look like to take something that previously has been nourishing, from accidental to intentional, from passive to present. So whether that's a relationship or a consistent practice or a moment that afterwards you were like, oh, that was good. That released something. That relaxed me. What would it look like to take whatever that is, from intention or accidental to intentional, from passive to active in the present? So we're going to take a few minutes to reflect on the questions. How do you recharge? What fills your cup? What's something small that you could do consistently to care for yourself? And we're going to use a tool called Padlet, if you want. to add kind of some of your reflections there. And from there, I'll have folks kind of reflect on what they're seeing, either out loud in the chat. Wonderful. Thank you. If you haven't added yours yet, please feel free to do so. And I would love to invite folks to either share in the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute. I'd love to hear from you, kind of what's sticking out to you about what you're seeing. You can either raise your hand or just come off of mute in terms of either what you've been reflecting about or what you're reflecting from others in the Padlet and seeing what is nourishing to others. Go for it, Helen, if you'd like to share.
So what I would share is that I care a lot about people, all people, and there's so much struggle and pain in the world. I recently read a book. It's called The Book of Joy, a compilation, kind of a dialogue between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And the thing I came away with that I remind myself is that living a life of joy is actually an act of both resilience and resistance. Mm. And so it's, I don't have to be sad or check myself from really experiencing joy, whether it's with my grandchildren or, just things in nature. That's what I'm supposed to be doing.
That's a really beautiful reflection. What's rising in other folks in the space?
Well, this is Lissa in northern Wisconsin. I can't get the Padlet to work for some reason, so I'm not finding much joy in technology right now. But I'm finding a lot of joy in Tim Marima's music. I just want to say thanks again, Tim, for the music that's been used throughout.
Hey, Lissa, I think that you froze on us, but I heard appreciation for Tim's music, and going to echo that. I'm seeing also in the Padlet that music, old, new, listening and playing, having that embodied experience has been really grounding for folks. Is anything else coming up for anyone else on the call in terms of what you're resonating with, what's coming up for you in terms of what's feeling sustaining?
Well, I find joy in just about everything. There's always, there's always gratefulness and giving thanks for things that some people don't think you need to give thanks for, but they always have a purpose. I play the dulcimer and I soothe myself with the dulcimer. I grow a lot of camellias. I love wildflowers. I can walk out the door and go into another world. That's one of the good things about living way out in the country. Because there's always beauty and something to be joyful for.
Thank you, Judith. I love the dulcimer soothes your soul.
Oh,
That's really
it's wonderful.
Wonderful. And I'm seeing Donna added, simple but food from the garden gives me joy, especially this late into October. Yes, may it be so. And so I think as we're tapping into this feeling of ease, of joy, of what feels sustaining, there's so much work to do, right? We're holding both of those things at once, right? And that can be particular to each person's life. That can be grand shifts that are happening in our world. And I think figuring out how to marry those two together and that dance those two together is so challenging and is ultimately what's sustaining, right? I think oftentimes thinking about what is a lot of the change that each of us are working for is generational work, right? It's around how do we turn towards each other? How do we become more interconnected? How do we feel more connected to the outside world and each other, especially living through 20 months where we're all in little boxes across the world. And so thinking about how to both relieve what's really urgent and really present and the needs that are right in front of us, and knowing that a lot of the shifts that we're ultimately cultivating take generations, right? So dancing in the immediate and the long term at once, that this work needs all of us to make it through. And so caring for ourselves and doing that self-awareness and doing that grounding to make it through is also resistive, right? Is also healing work, is also grounding, is also about interconnection. And that tending to ourselves, as Alex L talks about, both heals us and the people that we're connected to and our lineages. And so thinking about kind of this big question of what are you being called to right now? Thinking about those experiences that were brought up and that were reflected about in the beginning parts of our session, and aligning that with what makes you energized. The thinking about, I think something I think a lot about is, are there things that I enjoy? So I really enjoy cooking. Do you enjoy building relationships? Are you a big spreadsheets person? I know, I love a spreadsheet, which, take it or leave it. And how can the things that cultivate you or you get really excited about, how could that contribute to community or to the work that you're working on? So kind of putting that together. I think about an example is, if friends of mine are doing a really hard thing. So let's say that they're going to support a medic or be out in the world doing volunteer work. I might say, oh, well, I can cook for you the week before you do that, right? And maybe give you a couple meals so you have food to come home to when you're done with that big thing you're doing. And that's me fostering the work. And maybe I'm not directly out there doing it, but I'm sustaining the network of people that I'm in relationship with, so that we can shift and turn towards each other and do hard things. And so I think with that kind of concept in mind, I'm going to invite us to do a little bit more reflection about what feels energizing to you right now. So ways of being in the world, maybe Judith is playing the dulcimer, that feel really nourishing to you. And then thinking about what are issues or places in your community that you're feeling called to be, and how might there be alignment there in terms of a role you could take on, in terms of a way you could contribute and show up that also sustains you while you're doing the hard work that's ahead of you. So kind of holding that in balance, and it can feel kind of like, oh, is that too simplistic? What does that look like? But I think kind of doing some of that matchmaking is ultimately how we sustain ourselves through all of it. So we're going to take probably 3 minutes, and I think we can have a group conversation about it. Initially, we're going to do breakout rooms, but I think because we're a small enough group, we can do some reflection together. So I'm going to put some music on, put some questions up, and we'll reflect and then come back. So I'm going to invite folks to come back. It's helpful when I unmute myself. So I'm wondering if we can share out a little bit about, and you could do this in the chat, or you're welcome to come off of mute. But these questions of what work or ways are showing up right now are you feeling drawn to? Where are places in your life that you could do that? And then thinking about like what might be one step that you might take to start doing that or deepen that in some way. So again, you can share in the chat, you can share out loud. Yes, Helen.
Okay, I'm going to verbalize this. This is something I've again started and kind of just from the perspective of putting it out there. So I am, our family has a foundation in the community in which I live. My relatives who were the founders actually made their money, followed their dream in the toy airplane business. And so there was a manufacturing plant in this small rural community. That has now, it stopped making toys in, like, I guess a little bit before, around the year 2000, I guess. And we have a museum that showcases kind of their life journey. And so one of the things that I have begun to, and one of the things we want to do is help others follow their dreams. And so my thought, my vision is that the old factory building become a makerspace, an entrepreneurial hub, something where, yes, people young and older can express themselves, try out new ideas, get some support. I'm not quite, like I said, right now I'm just verbalizing and seeing where it goes.
That's so beautiful. And I can see the strong connection between you're trying to cultivate joy and openness and play. And so being able to chart this through line of, okay, what do you have access to? What is your role in relationship to this building and this community and this foundation? And how might that get woven together? And so creating a space to cultivate that and to create a container for more joy and possibility and creation to emerge. That's really beautiful, Helen. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. What are other folks thinking about? Yeah, Vanessa.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm not on video, but Helen, I just had to tell you, I love that vision. We just put together a grant application within the state of Iowa to do maker spaces like that. I mean, it involves a lot of other stuff. It ties to the American Rescue Plan, but I'd be fascinated to talk with you about that more if you'd like offline. Anyway, we were talking about putting it in lots of smaller communities, things like that as part of this big grant thing that we just put in for. Because there's so many spaces out in rural America that are abandoned or underused or whatever. And it's so cool to hear someone else have a vision like that. But lots of people have similar visions.
I'd love to talk to you more. I can put an email address in, or if you would like to put one in.
Yep, I'll do that.
I will then encourage if folks want to continue sharing, and I'll do what I can to be here.
Vanessa Burnett again. I had started a nonprofit, a 501c4, which is semi-political, to work on rural engagement, specifically on civic engagement and also on messaging. And I am going to get that going again this fall. I had to put it on hold for complicated reasons, but so that's where I'm putting my energy over the next few months. And that's one of the things I wanted to join in on this, is to just get ideas and see what's going on out there. And so this is really helpful, but that's what I intend to do next in answer to the question. Partly, it's part of the thing.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
And, and I'll add to that, this is Vanessa again, since it's still quiet. Part of the reason for that is because of the civic engagement. It's partly rural sociology, but it's also partly that when you look at how to fight tyranny and extremism, we need the connection to other humans so that we don't get scared. And so with them so we don't get scared and disengaged and let the extremists take over. And so that's kind of what we're focusing on, is building connection and community and civic engagement to help us, because we're the majority, to help, or the non-extremists are the majority. So how do we help move that forward and help each other? So that's a little bit more.
Absolutely. And it sounds like that thread of fostering connection and fostering interdependence relationally is something that benefits clearly countering extremism, and that helps us along the way, because then we feel we're part of something bigger, and we're part of community, and we're part of like those alongside us.
Yeah.
And Kimberly, I think that's a great point. I think that focusing on staying positive on social media is a great focus, right? Saying like, what's the thing that you can impact, that you can control, and saying, this is the thing I'm going to do that's going to sustain a way of being in the world. So it can be small, it can be big. And I think the idea is to have a focus that allows you to really have something that you're holding on to, or that you're sustaining as a practice towards the world that you want. Wonderful. So I'm curious, I'm happy to keep facilitating us talking or sitting in silence, because I know we're doing a little bit of both. I want to make sure that all the people who want to share get to do that. I'm also happy to wrap up a little bit early if there isn't more that folks want to say. So I will open the space to just see what else is coming up for folks, reflections from any part of the session so far, or something that you're trying to bring into being or cultivating kind of at this nexus of care and creating change in the ways that you want to see it.
That the positive replies on social media are really good, and not calling people out or making adverse remarks. Sometimes I just feel led to pick up the telephone or meet with somebody and talk to them in terms of could you consider, a lot of times if you open up conversations with could you consider, it helps them to and then give some of your input, so you're not directly butting heads with them. I have a lot of nieces and nephews and grand nieces and nephews, and they carry on lively conversations all the time. And I found that a lot of times they will run things by me before they start espousing them to the world, which I think is pretty good. It helps them, and I mean, they're not I learn a lot by listening to them and then turning around and saying, well, could you consider this? One of them today called me and said, well, I know I should be doing this. And I said, look, should on anybody. We don't let anybody should on us, and we don't should on anybody else. So you could do this, or you could not do it, but don't go shooting on everybody about it. And that just totally broke the ice. And then we had a really good conversation. So I guess that's kind of my role at this age, because I'm like senior member of the family now since my mother died. She was 103 and 9 months, and she had a saying for everything. We wrote down all of her sayings and put them in a book.
Oh, I love that, Judith. That's awesome. Vanessa, did you go ahead?
Well, I love what Judith said. And I also wanted to say, because I love that we need to have that in families. That's just so cool. But also, I think it was Donna asked a question about, does anyone have tools to suggest to help lower the temperature in community? And I mean, that is a really complicated question, but I offer two things. One is that I heard Secretary Tom Vilsack, he's the Secretary of Agriculture right now, but he spoke in Iowa a few years ago between his periods of being secretary. But he talked about one thing that we could do to help with the social fabric, especially in rural communities, is come together to solve a problem that, and it's hard to put something together to do that, but one of the challenges that's out there are food problems. We're always going to have that. And so he suggested, get people together, have a potluck, solve and now this was pre-pandemic when he suggested this. So now we have a lot more complications, but you could have an outside thing. But anyway, his point was, get together, decide that you have a problem that you're going to solve, bring food together to solve it, and then come up with a schedule, and then say, okay, next month we're going to do this, and then in 6 months this is where we're going to be. And that can help to work on creating connections with people who maybe, like the question was about extremism, maybe you can bring some people in to find some common ground. And so that's one thing. And another just quick example is there's a guy who passed away a few years ago, but his name was Jeremy Taylor. He was a Unitarian minister who did dream work. And this is sounds like kind of a woo-woo kind of a thing, but he went into communities that were very divided about race, urban communities, and had dream groups, which was, and it's just an example of something that could happen, but it brought people together who normally would not find themselves sharing things, but they came together and did like dream analysis. And one guy would say, well, here's my dream that I had. And then they would follow his methodology and do a dream thing. And you know what? It sounds a little airy-fairy, but it's also not. It worked. He created some long-term bonds in these really difficult communities. And I think you could do that with lots of different things, book groups or whatever. There's actually a book group list on neutral topics, books that people can talk about and find common ground on. So, and I think the challenge that we're in with the extremism and in these communities is that it takes incredible strength to be able to come in and even start things like that or have those conversations. It takes a lot of fortitude and courage. And that, anyway, two random things to think about with that, but there's a lot of ideas in that department. And that's the kind of thing, the nonprofit I'm working on, that's the kind of thing we're going to be getting into.
Yeah, absolutely. Do other folks have suggestions to Donna's question of tools or ways of kind of lowering the temperature on relationship building, particularly when there's divergent viewpoints in community?
I know there are some groups, People's Action is maybe one of them, that have been doing what they call deep canvassing. So where they're going and they're really, I guess they're door knocking primarily, but then they're really taking time to talk to people, and they have kind of a script, I think, which is really designed to try to draw people out and let them talk about, what are the things that concern them or things they feel good about. And they say it's been a way to talk about race or some of these issues that are so contentious. And actually, they've tracked it and feel like it's really changed the way they voted by a pretty significant margin, because it doesn't take much of a change to make a difference. But there's probably stuff on the internet about deep canvassing. But I know it's, and just, I think around here, a lot of people do feel like nobody's listening to them. And that's why they've, really moved over to Trump and the kind of crazy stuff. And because they feel like they're being ignored and not cared about. So I can see where the deep listening would make a lot of sense. And it'd be good conversations to have too. Yeah, they put a link in there in the chat.
Yeah, I think a theme I'm hearing from a lot of these comments is like, how do you foster belonging and relationship, right? With the people that we're already connected with, but then like expanding that circle in meaningful ways. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, was there anything that anyone wanted to share that you haven't had a chance to yet in our last 5 minutes? And then I will close with a little video. All right. I'm not scared of silence, and I will take it as a cue that we're heading to the end of our space together. So one thing I will say is just thank you so much for being part of this time together, and kind of going through a more non-traditional workshop format, right? That really goes through reflecting and just space to kind of be together, and embracing the silence and abundance of conversation at the same time. One thing I will name is I'm part of our social healing team at the On Being Project. And really our goal for that is to, figure out how to foster healing where there's fracture. And that can look a lot of ways. We have a whole team that's dedicated to this. And so if there are projects or questions or moments that you're wrestling through in the work that you're doing in your specific context, please reach out to us. We'd love to accompany you in that work. And yeah, it was really good to be with all of you and get to share this time. I'm going to close with a poetry video that we put together of Wendell Berry's piece of Wild Things. And then the session will close. So thank you all so much for being together, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening.
The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free.